Hi everybody, welcome to another Regent Ramas recording. I got my cup of coffee here. I'm in my craft space, so let's get started. I was chatting with somebody the other day about how they wanted to finish the edge of a piece that they were working on, a tunic or a shirt, and I suggested to them that they use bias tape. Bias tape is not actually traditional. In fact, bias tape wasn't invented for a long time. They used other types of trim in the Middle Ages, but for us Amp Guardians, it's a really great way for us to finish off the edge of a piece, make it look crisp and clean, and do it with a single stitch. Now, if you're not comfortable with doing the double fold and then stitching, this is a solution for you. Now, bias tape can be pretty expensive. I mean, unless you get it in bulk. You can buy it usually for somewhere between 50 and 70 cents a yard. If you get it up here in Canada, I pay about 69 cents a yard, and I buy it usually by the roll. My rolls are really big. I get them like this. And I usually get about 1,000 yards at a time. As it turns out, I'm running a little low on my bias tape. So I have a project I want to do, and I want to make bias tape. In fact, I want to make bias tape of a very specific color. This is the color I'm working with. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but it's a really dark sort of a royal purple. And I want to make bias tape that looks like this. I've already gone through the process once for myself to make the bias tape. As you can see, bias tape winds up being a folded tape with the outsides folded in. So it's folded in and then folded again and ironed flat. But making bias tape by hand is an incredibly time-consuming process. So I want to show you a shortcut that I know so that you can make bias tape really quickly. Here I've got some pins. I've got my my ironing board, and I've got my iron right here. She's ready to go and already hot. The pins, these ones are plastic tipped. If you're going to do this, you might want to do it with glass-tipped pins. Now, I just happen to have some lovely glass-tipped pins right here, given to me by a friend of mine. The glass tip is great because the iron is going to touch the pins and plastic tips melt. So I'm going to use some glass-tipped ones. Here we go. I'm going to try and do this so that you can see the glass-tipped pin. I'm going to try and get it so that the head of the pin lands on the green space. But essentially what I want to do is I want to create a trap for the fabric using my pin. And the way I'm going to do that is really simple. I want to try and figure out where the center fold of my fabric is going to be if I fold both outside edges in at the same time. Oh, would you look at that? It turns out that my ironing board actually has marks on it already that are exactly the width that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pin, I'm going to tuck it into the fabric of my ironing board. I keep saying cutting board. Okay, of my ironing board. That's funny. It's like me not putting my seatbelt on. Okay, and I'm going to get that pin to run across and create a little bridge so that I've got a tiny little bit under the fabric here, and then I'm going to tuck the rest of the pin under the fabric on the opposite side. Now I've got a tiny little bridge. Okay? My fabric is going to go underneath the tiny little bridge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it like so, and I'm going to get it underneath there. The way I'm going to do that is by pulling the pin back, folding my fabric, and sliding it carefully into place. Okay, like so. Now, I actually had a friend that I taught this trick to, and she asked me, how important is it that you get the exact center of the fabric? And the reality is, it's really not that important. As long as the outside edges are folded down, then your bias tape will work. Okay, see? That way, my fabric will go back and forth under the pin. Can you see that? Back and forth under the pin. Now, what I want to do is, I'm going to take this starting end, and I'm going to do the starting end by hand. So I'm going to fold these pieces of fabric back, holding them in place with my fingers so you can see the one edge is folded this way, this edge is folded that way. So they're folded together like this. And I'm going to grab my iron here, and I'm going to just quickly press the end. I'm pressing the end. I'm using right now a polyester cotton blended fabric. So I'm actually going to have my iron a little bit hotter than normal because I want it to press fairly quickly. Okay? Whoop, just like that. That's now pressed both edges of my bias tape. Now I'm going to extend this a little bit. While I'm pulling on my fabric, I'm actually using my fingers to guide the two outer edges towards the middle. Sometimes, as in the case right here, they'll overlap each other a little bit. That's okay. As long as the fold here and here are at the same width as your little bridge, then it'll be all right. Because later, we're going to take that and we're going to fold that in half yet again. But for now, I just want to do this. And I'm going to take and grab another pin. Another pin. These ones are glass tipped. I'm going to use that pin to create a second piece of bridge. Let's see if I can move my thing. To create another bridge that's approximately a little bit farther down, approximately the width of my iron. Because my iron is going to fit in here. It's going to sit like that. And I'll show you. I'm just going to create another piece of bridge down here, which is going to be the exact same as the first little bridge that I made. And I'm going to tuck my already ironed section of my bias tape into there so that I can get my pin under the fabric. Now I have two little bridges. See? Whoop, whoop. Two little bridges attached to my ironing board. And I am going to take my iron and I'm going to put it right there. Now that iron is hot and she is running. And what we're going to do is I'm simply going to take this end of the fabric and I'm going to pull on it with my hand. And on this side of the fabric, I'm simply going to guide the two edges of the fabric into a straight line so that while I'm pulling with this end, okay, my iron is ironing really nicely and slowly, and I'm folding down this edge of the fabric with my fingers. One side going in, other side going in, trying to keep the cut edges at approximately the center of my fabric. Okay, see? Boop. Does that make sense? Good. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So now, what I've got here is I've actually got a fairly long run here of fabric that has been folded. It's folded this way on the one side, it's folded that way on the other side, and the center of the two cut pieces of fabric are right down the middle. The iron has been pressing it while I'm pulling it. Now check this out. I've got about, I don't know, maybe 2 yards worth of fabric. I'm just going to really quickly make about 2 yards worth of bias tape. Using my iron back in place, the iron is touching the pin on that side. Whoop, this side over here. The iron is touching the pin over, oh, I don't think you can see that finger. There. The iron's touching the pin right here, which is kind of helping hold the iron in place. And I'm sort of lifting up on the fabric on this side. I'm kind of lifting it up. That also helps to cause the iron to slide a little bit over to my right, your left. Here we go. So now I'm going to pull the fabric and I'm going to make the bias tape using my fingers on the one side to guide it and on the other side using my hand to pull the fabric through. And you can go fairly quickly. I wouldn't recommend you go too fast. You'll figure it out based on how hot your iron is, but I like to keep my iron fairly hot so that while I'm doing this, I can do it just a touch quicker. Not only that, a slightly hotter iron on semi-synthetic fabrics creates a sharper edge. It also melts the fabric, so be careful with that. All right, so I'm just gonna keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep guiding with my fingers. I'm pulling through the pins. The iron is doing its job. My fabric, the cut ends of my fabric are lining up down the middle of my bias tape. This is a long piece of bias tape. This is good because I actually need about 6 meters for my next project. Just gonna finish it. I'm gonna keep going. You keep watching. You can see here the fabric, I don't know, maybe you can't see it. Maybe the purple was a bad choice. But you can see, if you can see, that the fabric sometimes doesn't quite perfectly line up in the middle. It actually overlaps a little bit. Sometimes one edge is a little steeper than the other. That's okay. It's actually gonna be just fine because what's coming out the other end is a folded and ironed uniform piece of fabric. And I'll show you close up what that looks like here in just a second because I'm almost at the end of my 2.5 yards. Goodness sakes, that didn't take very long. Okay, here we go. This is a neat little trick. So, gonna just finish that. There's the end. This is the end. It's now tucking in, and I've kind of pushed the two pieces. You can see that one's a little bit wider than the other. It's okay. That doesn't really matter. It'll be just fine. And I'm just slowly, slowly, slowly pulling it out so that it finishes. What I find is at the end piece always wants to come apart. So this end little bit, I usually actually just cut it off. But today I'm going to take and iron that just to make it flat. So now you can see what I've got here is I've got the folded fabric on one side, the folded fabric on the other side, right? And it's nicely uniform. Look how nicely uniform that is all the way along. And I've made a lot. I made like a lot of bias tape in like a very short period of time. But I'm not quite finished yet. See, because now I need to take this piece and I need to fold it like this. Boop, like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the exact same thing, only I'm going to do it again. I'm going to create another little bridge, but I'm going to make the bridge a little bit more narrow. So I'm going to take my fabric, I'm going to fold it to the width that I want my final bias tape to be. I'm going to pull out this piece of the bridge right there, and I'm going to tuck my bias tape under this. Tuck it. Come on. Nope. I'm going to wreck the pin, and I'm going to try again. Here we go. Put it under the bias tape. There we go. Bias tape goes underneath, and the pin goes back in. Only this time it's a little more shallow so that it's a little more narrow a bridge. Narrow? I guess that's the right term. I'm going to pull that along, and just like last time, I'm going to lay that out. I'm going to grab my iron, and I'm going to set the first little bit. So I'm just ironing the first little piece so that it holds into place while I prep the rest. Okay, there you go. I'm going to now take the other end of this, open up my other bridge pin, and I'm going to tuck the bias tape under it and put that back in. So now again, I have two pin bridges, one here, one here. I'm taking my already folded and ironed piece of bias tape, folding it again, putting it back in under my bridges, replace the iron, blorp, and I just kind of repeat the process. On one side, I'm using my hand to guide the bias tape into the pin bridge, and on the other side, I'm using my hand to just slowly and carefully pull it underneath the iron. This is a great way to get bias tape that matches the color of the piece that you're doing. Or if you have some really special fabric that you want to do, or if, like me, your local store doesn't sell the color of bias tape that you want, or if you're also like me, you're just really thrifty and you'd rather spend a half an hour making bias tape than spend $15 buying it. As you can see, I'm just slowly pulling the bias tape through. I'm doing it nice and slow because I want the iron to give me a nice crisp edge on my bias tape. I want that iron to be, I want the tape to be balanced on both sides, and I want the iron to give me a nice clean edge. So the iron's nice and hot. It's going underneath my bridge. My glass top pins are not melting because of the iron, and I'm very slowly but very surely making some bias tape. Man, okay, I'm gonna finish this off because this is the second part here is a lot slower than the first part because you want to make sure that it gets nice and crisp. But I really just want to show you this. So I'm gonna pull this iron off. That was about a yard's worth. And check this out, okay? We just made this. I just made this bias tape. This bias tape is ready for my next project. See, it's folded, outside, in, folded down the middle, and ready to use. This has been a Regent Ramas recording. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.